for Outside Bike Bicycling, New York Times, and I'm an author. And in my other life, I am a professional mountain bike coach and a volunteer coach for a team of kids, the Sage International Mountain Bike Team. My husband, actually, we live here because of outdoor recreation. My husband is the league director for the Idaho Interscholastic Cycling League, which is a nonprofit organization that basically makes mountain biking a high school sport for middle school and high school kids. 1,500 of them in Idaho. You might have seen us out on the Ridge to Rivers trails sometimes, where we're trying to break into smaller groups and be of less impact to hikers. Anyway, our panel today is about I like to think we have the fun job. We're about the end users, right? And so because everyone usually goes into a post-lunch fugue, we are going to take a poll of end userhood by, you're going to scoot your chairs back and you're going to stand up if you are one of the following end users. So scoot your chairs back, get ready to stand up, and I want you to stand up and stretch. Since I'm a coach, I'm going to make you do the thing. So if you hike or trail run, stand up and stretch. Awesome. Okay, sit back down. If you fish or hunt, stand up and stretch. Look at this, pretty good. Okay, sit back down. If you snowmobile or ride an OHV, stand up and stretch. Nice. Oh, we have a cluster over here. Okay, if you mountain bike, stand up. Yay. Okay, sit down. If you do river sports, you run rivers, kayak, I bet a lot of you are doing squats. Okay, you can sit back down. And last one, if you do snow sports. Oh, what else? What am I missing? What am I missing? Horseback riding. Horseback riding. Stand up. Yay. Okay, thank you for that. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to be talking about from the perspective of the end user. I don't know that I've ever had to follow a governor before, but I do have a governor story that relates to outdoor recreation. I used to live in Alabama, and I was asked to take the First Lady of Alabama on a mountain bike ride. First Lady was 80, and she was doing a tour of the state parks, and she wanted to have like the quintessential experience at each state park. And I was so nervous that I was going to kill the First Lady because she had never been on a mountain bike before. She survived, and it's the only time I've ever mountain biked in pearls. So. So, our panel, I like to think that public lands are classrooms and clubhouses. They are vehicles for education, but they are also places for communities to build. And I want all of our panelists to sort of introduce themselves with an anecdote about how you've seen the outdoors forge a better human being, whether that's you or someone that you know. And I'll just share one myself. So I'm the mother of a land user. He's a mountain biker, and he hunts and he fishes, and he snowboards, and he does all sorts of things. And in trying to raise him to be more aware of being a land user and conservation and how to be a better steward than I think I've been, I'm trying to take him from spawning ground to sea on the river, and I'm not a rafter, so this is a big adventure. So anyway, I'm trying to use public lands to raise a better human, and that's my story. So we have our wonderful panel. We have Evan Robbins, who is the Education and Stewardship Manager for Tread Lightly. Please share your better human in the outdoor story.
Hello, hello.
Yes.
All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Evan Robbins, so I'm Tread Lightly's National Education and Stewardship Program Manager. To kind of put it simply, I work on our trail conservation projects and our volunteer projects. So I interface with agency, government, and industry to find resources to support that type of work. And, I've been doing this for over a decade for Tread Lightly. I've been part of hundreds of public land access projects. You can see our little slide up there, just got a little metrics for y'all. But I want to give you a little information about who Tread Lightly is and kind of, what the motorized industry is all about and what the community is all about. So Tread Lightly was created by the U.S. Forest Service in 1985, right? Just as a PSA. So to talk about responsible use, motorized recreation, how does technologies interface with those public lands? If you remember in the 80s, folks who are old enough to, there's a lot of technology coming on the scene. So we had three-wheelers popping up. The single-track the single-track motorcycle scene was really alive right then. And our agency friends were wondering, like, how are we going to manage this? And, look at the effect that we're having on public lands with motorized vehicles. So the Tread Lightly message was created, ran for a few years, but because of, I would say, poor advertising within the motorized industry, we decided to transition into a nonprofit, so a 501c3 nonprofit, to better amalgamate public-private funds, continue our mission of education, and continue to support public land recreation, and be an advocate for the motorized trail system. So in my time, before I knew what Tread Lightly was, and while I was at university, and this whole group kind of reminds me of being in university again, I looked at myself as kind of a backcountry enthusiast. I was a hunter, I was a fly fisherman. I grew up, with some awesome mentors who are, really embodied like traditional archery, and that was a huge part of who we were. What I didn't see until I was a little older and maybe more mature was there was this constance of having a capable four-wheel drive vehicle, a vehicle that could get us to the places that we loved and that we wanted, and then not only help ourselves to get there, but help others, as we were on the trail that maybe weren't so well prepared. And I think that really embodies, what Tread Lightly's about, what the four-wheel drive community at large is about. Now, obviously, we're always playing the 80-20 rule, right? Like some people don't care or don't know about rules and regs or have a strong ethic, and so that's the place that we get to work the most. But for the most part, people in the four-wheel drive community want to give back, and they care about public lands, and they're probably all of you today. Just like I thought of myself as a backcountry guy, I realized pretty quickly, well, I have a Jeep. Everywhere I go is on a dirt road. And so it's important that we all identify as motorized recreation, no matter how far it is that we go up on the trail. And, I think as I've kind of grown in that thought and idea, I've really been able to share that with other folks, and just connect the dots of like how important it is that we have our motorized trail system. And I used to be the one being like, look at this dirt biker, riding up this equestrian trail, right? And after I hiked all day to get up there to my elk hunting spot, not understanding that, that was a motorized trail system as well, and that they had just as much right to be there. So, as far as an anecdotal story, I want to talk about myself and just my growth and what public land recreation really is, what it's meant for me, how important the road system is for us to get to the places that we love. And I think somebody mentioned it earlier today. If we don't see the places, then how do we know that we want to protect them, or how do we know that we even care, right? That they even exist. I spent 20 days, just got back 3 days ago from Moab, working on mostly archaeological and paleontological resource protection projects with the Bureau of Land Management. It was a fantastic time. We get to interface with the agency, but really people get to just see these places that they would never otherwise know about. Some of these off-road tracks go right past, paleontological sites that folks would never see. And so they don't realize how important it is to protect that trail access and then give people, the opportunity to see these places. And to take a little adage, phrase that I took from backcountry hunters and anglers when I was a kid, use the quads God gave you, right? But what if you don't have quads? There's people who don't. What if you can't hike to that spot? What if you don't have access to horses to get to the backcountry? What are you left with? You're left with the motorized trail system. And so it's just super valuable that we have that. And, I want everybody to, and I know everybody in here is, conscious of what real outdoor recreation looks like and how important, we all work together and interface on those. So let's talk about a little about Tread Lightly's funding, right? I think that's a big piece of why we're here. Like, how do we fund our programs and how do we collaborate with agencies and others? So our first, sorry guys. Our first stream of funding is our members, right? We have about 13,000 members nationally. About 300 of those here are in the state of Idaho. And our members really help us filter information to the program managers or to our partners in land management to support public land access projects. So these infrastructure projects have a wide range, anything from building bridges to working on dispersed recreation areas. Maybe that's closing an illegal route that was a user-generated route. So our projects have a wide range of effectiveness, and they facilitate a mixed-use type of recreation environment. So that's our membership funding, right? They help us with funding, they help us find projects, they help us in our volunteerism and trail advocacy type of programs. Our other source of funding is our grants and agreements. So Tread Lightly has about 30 active grants and agreements nationally. Many of those are here in the West, but our newest one actually is with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in West Virginia to protect the greater Guyandotte River crawfish, which is an endemic species only found on the Guyandotte River drainage. For those of you who don't know about that drainage, it's where the Hatfield-McCoy Trail runs, right? So it's a very popular trail system in the east, and that's our newest partnership is with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We've had a number of U.S. Fish and Wildlife partnerships in the past, but I think that's our furthest east one that we have. So we're really excited about that. And again, we're talking about responsible motorized use, but you can see how that affects, wildlife and wild places. So this project particularly is to educate, mostly West Virginia natives about river crossings and how that damages the native habitat of the Guyandotte River crawfish. And we do projects like that all over the country that support wildlife, type of habitat work. And those are a really important piece of our contracts and our agreements. Lastly, I'll talk about our corporate partnership. So like I mentioned, Tread Lightly was created to amalgamate public-private funding specifically from the motorized industry. We still do that today. We have amazing partners. GM just auctioned off the first Hummer EV at the Jackson Barrett car auction. It's a very famous car auction here in America. And we generated $500,000 from that program, and it really helped us, to put those funds on the ground in an unrestricted manner that's not associated with a grant or agreement and allows us to move at the speed of recreation. So yeah, that's a little bit about Tread Lightly, our history, some of our funding, and excited to talk about, more outdoor rec collaboration in the future.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Katie McKalip, who's the Vice President of External Affairs and Communications for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Is this, it is on, great. Thanks so much. So a story about public lands. My parents don't own a ranch, and I did not grow up on a big plantation with quail and whitetail hunting. I didn't have a duck lease growing up. But I spent a ton of time outdoors. I grew up in a military family, grew up outside of Washington, D.C. My mom worked in public education. So we didn't grow up in a family with a lot of money, but I was outdoors all the time. I was an active user of our local county park with a trail through the woods near my parents' house in the D.C. suburbs and a lake at the end of it. I was an active user of our federal public lands from an early age. I did not think about what those opportunities represented for me when I was a kid, but now, given the perspective of a few years and a lot of time spent working in this space, I see how important, how critical those opportunities were for me, but for so many of us. So I won't ask you to raise your hand if you grew up on a ranch, or if you grew up on a plantation in the South, or if you grew up with a lot of private lands at your disposal. Raise your hand if you were like me and you grew up taking advantage of the public opportunities on our lands and waters during your early years. I think I see just about every hand in the room raised. So I think it's pretty clear that there's a reason why we're all here today, and it has to do with our public opportunities on our lands and waters. And it's why I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak to you today, to hear from the administration and from other voices regarding new and ongoing efforts to manage our shared resources and expand opportunities for diverse public lands recreationists. During the pandemic, the increase in public lands and water recreationists was apparent. This is something that my organization, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, watch very closely because while we are obviously interested in facilitating opportunities for members of the public to hunt and fish and enjoy our public lands and waters, we are also invested in ensuring that these landscapes don't suffer from the impacts of excessive use. So let me say that one more time. Our public lands and waters provide amazing opportunities for adventure, for challenge, for solace. What we saw during the pandemic years compounded the increases that were already taking place. This is unsurprising, as these lands and waters are available for everyone, as I mentioned a moment ago, regardless of race, background, the size of your wallet. Hunters and anglers, I'm proud to say, have long had a stake in the administration of these critical landscapes and have helped shape their management and their protection. We welcome new users. Ashley was telling me about her first time hunting just this past year, who appreciate the opportunity these places offer, and who will stand up and be advocates and fight for our continued ability to access and enjoy them. However, with increased user numbers, obviously comes increased pressure. Pressure on the places that provide irreplaceable fish and wildlife habitat and unmatched access to hunting and fishing and other forms of recreation, and on our cherished outdoor traditions. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is invested in conserving important public lands and waters and sustaining and expanding opportunities for the public to access them. But we're equally invested in ensuring that the agencies charged with managing these resources are robustly funded and have the tools they need to do their work. This is always a challenge. Some of these needs were addressed through passage of the Great American Outdoors Act in 2020, which included, as I think some of you are aware, I heard it earlier today, $9.5 billion over 5 years to address critical maintenance backlogs on public lands and waters. But more remains to be done. Together, as a community of hunters, anglers, recreationists, community members, business owners, we can and must work together to get more money for public lands and waters from the federal budget. The numbers don't lie, and they are sobering. So federal spending for programs relating to natural resources and the environment plays a critical role in the administration of our shared lands and waters. While spending in this area has more than doubled since 1962, from approximately $13 billion in 1962 to $40 billion by 2018, that total has represented a smaller and smaller share of federal spending. Throughout the 60s and 70s, when the federal budget was significantly smaller than it is today, public land spending accounted for roughly 2% of the federal budget. But wait, it gets worse. Today, it accounts for less than 1% of the entire federal budget. It's about $40 billion of a $4 trillion budget. So we need to come together and work together to solve this problem. It's time to build up partnerships with untraditional allies, and it's time to look outside the box for new sources of outdoors funding. For close to a century, federal programs that are part of the Pittman-Robertson Act and Dingell-Johnson Act have played a major role in funding conservation in the U.S. through excise taxes on guns, ammo, fishing gear, boats. Yet, I say this as a committed hunter and angler, new models deserve consideration. An outdoor legacy tax, sometimes referred to as a backpack tax, would levy a similar small tax on outdoor gear, providing a new source of conservation funding and giving non-hunters and anglers the chance to contribute to the management of resources we all enjoy. This is something that hunters and anglers initially lobbied for and really shoulder with a great sense of pride, being able to contribute to the management of the resources we all share. In addition to funding, appropriate and responsible usage guidelines deserve our consideration. It's important that all recreational users have the opportunity to enjoy our shared landscapes. However, this does not equate to all uses all the time, everywhere. Through building relationships and finding common ground, we can address factors impacting public use, travel management in particular, but also resource management. Wrap it up. These variables will have long-term impacts on our public grounds. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has a long history of working with groups outside the hunting and fishing space, including national organizations like the Outdoor Alliance and Outdoor Industry Association, as well as organizations like the Adobe Whitewater Club in New Mexico. This is just one example, but it's an important one as the work that BHA is engaged in with our partners in New Mexico has the potential to affect the public ability to legally access waterways within the state into the long term. So in closing, a question I'll go back to that we considered as we discussed this panel was, what will it take to sustainably manage recreation into the future? I would say that a few things, 3 things are critical. Focus on funding, consider access as well as landscape level conservation, and embrace untraditional partnerships. So to that end, thank you to our hosts for facilitating these important conversations happening today. It will take us one step closer to creating a home for us.
Thank you, Katie.
On our shared resources.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ashley Korenblat. She's the founding managing director of Public Land Solutions and the CEO of Western Spirit Cycling Adventures. And she wears a lot of hats, and I wanted to share one little anecdote. We actually met before this panel while recreating in the hot springs around Salmon. We met at the Boat Box, and we just realized that this morning, so small world.
It's not the only person in this room I've met at a hot springs, just saying. I'm just going to stand up because otherwise you cannot see anyone. Okay, I have 3 really fast slides, and I'm going to go through them really quickly. Public Land Solutions is a nonprofit we formed about 12 years ago, and we are a recreation economy consultant. And we're a nonprofit so that we can take funding so that we can supplement the funding that the cities, towns, and states that hire us pay us to do recreation economy consulting. So we look at what's going on in your recreation economy. Next one. So the way we do what we call a recreation asset review. And it's not an audit and it's not an inventory. It's looking through each area's opportunities, threats, weaknesses. If you've got a trail project you've been working on for 5 years and it's not happening, there's a reason, right? And you need to be pivoting that energy in a new direction. So we help communities find recreation assets that are really going to work for them, and we do that through endless stakeholder meetings, like forever. The whole time the project is happening, stakeholder input is coming in. And then we do a lot of research, and then we look at the funding options. And we also work on the policies that affect the communities that are looking to add outdoor recreation to their economic development strategies. Here's some of the places we've been working. Ravalli County, Yellowstone. We're doing a project now for the whole state of New Mexico, 33 counties and 29 pueblos, looking at their recreation opportunities. Montrose County, Colorado, and as Mayor Nate mentioned, we've been working in Farmington and also Emory County, Utah. So that's a quick overview of what PLS does. And now I'm going to give a quick 30-second history of public land from the Anglo perspective. But it's really important when we think about 21st century recreation. So for most of human history, the best way to generate wealth for your family was to own land. You're the duke, I'm the peasant, your family's getting richer, I have nothing, right? We come to America, and all of a sudden we can all own land. Woohoo, right? Like it's going to be great. So you can imagine that if your family was in, pick someplace, Salt Lake, Moab, Boise, whatever, 100 and something years ago, and you were making a living, and then all of a sudden this dude shows up and says, I'm the ranger, Forest Service, BLM, whatever. It's like, it started off on a bad foot, right? And there's this idea that the federal estate is prohibiting local communities from generating wealth because the federal government owns the land. Maybe it made sense in the 19th century. Today, there's a million ways to earn a living that don't involve land ownership, right? And in fact, what we're seeing is communities like the one we're in today is thriving and prospering because it has access to shared public land. Now, this is asking a lot of people to make a 180-degree switch from what their grandfathers told them about how they should feel about public land. But it is happening, and that's what we're seeing through public land solutions. What we're seeing really move the needle and move us towards 21st century recreation and the policies and the funding that is needed. A few things. One, moving the conversation from the whole resource extraction versus protection continuum, that's not the whole picture. That's a very small part of the picture. Then looking at how experiences and the memories we get from them affect ecosystems and economies. So those experiences have an economic impact. So the other point is acknowledging these two big macroeconomic trends that everybody's been mentioning, growth in remote work and growth in demand for outdoor access. When I worked on Wall Street, I learned one really important thing. The trend is your friend. Like, do not try to go against the trend. You've got to work with the trend. So we need to really acknowledge those, which we're doing today, and that's really important. And then finally, land in its natural state brings quality of life, which leads to business investment, community pride, and prosperity. And just a couple quick points about that. Treasured recreation assets are de facto protected. Not once, but 3 times we have had oil and gas leases deferred on plain BLM land that had a trail system on it that was close to town and mattered to the community. So it actually works to try to figure out what is the best if we eventually really, really need the oil from that spot, okay. But do we need it today? Do we need to burn the Picasso to heat the house for an hour? So we've been able to work through that in a lot of ways. And we've also been able to work directly with oil and gas developers on their access roads and where they site the well pads. And that way we can have both. So that's one piece. The federal agencies, especially the BLM, has a really important role to play in the economic development of gateway communities. And that goes way beyond what that involves is connecting that dot between healthy landscapes and prosperous communities. And it's really happening in red and blue communities across the West. But the key, of course, is planning. So one of the things that we work on is moving away from just polygon management to experience management, which may involve cross-jurisdictional arrangements. And when you really work on providing the experience that the user is expecting to have, whether it's equestrian or OHV or mountain bike or whatever, if you're meeting the visitor's expectations, guess what? They're really likely to follow the rules. So that's great because you're incentivizing good behavior. I'm going to close with 2 little Moab examples because that's where I'm from. And everyone's like, oh, we don't want to be Moab. But you kind of do in some ways. So one good thing that just happened in Moab in the Utah legislature, yes, the Utah legislature, we had moved TRT taxes, bed taxes, hotel room taxes. And remember, that was originally a thing where the hotels agreed to pay the taxes if the money was used to promote them, right? But we had moved some of that money away from promotion to infrastructure. We used it to fix the sewer. That was good. And then we had started using some of that money for diversification so that Moab wouldn't be entirely dependent on visitors. Well, the legislature rolled back the part about the diversification part, but they didn't touch the infrastructure piece. So that's progress, right? They're starting to see that if you're going to have visitation, you also have to invest in the infrastructure. And the other thing I wanted to point out, that I grabbed this right when I was walking out the door, I'm sure you can all see it perfectly. This is a map of Moab, and the pink is Arches National Park, and then there's a whole bunch of trail systems, and I'll show you this later. But they are along the road corridors, and the space in between those trail systems are WSAs. So it is possible through planning to build a sustainable recreation economy even in Moab. Okay, that's it for now.
And WSA, I think I heard someone say
Wilderness Study Areas.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up, Erik Weiseth, the Vice President of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association.
Howdy. So I represent outfitters, basically. I'm a river person. I own and run a rafting company as well as some other river-based stuff. We do fishing and everything else. But I do sit on the board for IOGA, which is kind of the organization that represents outfitters in the state. And just to give the quick intro piece on sort of an experience that I've had, I'll give you two. My very first river trip, I was 6 months old in my dad's drift boat on the Rogue River. And both of my kids, their very first river trip, they were 6 months old in that same drift boat on the Rogue River, a drift boat I still fish in today commercially. So the other one is, we had a guest a number of years ago. She was a woman kind of, I think in her 50s, and had gone through some midlife changes where she kind of had to rediscover who she was and what her capacities were as a human. And she lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and she somehow found us online. And she booked an inflatable kayaking trip in Idaho, and by herself. She came, she went on that trip, and she ended up going on a bunch of trips with us. And after one big adventure that she came on with us, she came up to me crying and said that after birthing her children, that was the most important experience she'd had in her life, that she rediscovered what she was capable of. It was a big adventure, and her friends had told her that she couldn't do it or shouldn't do it, and she came and she did it. And it was life-changing for her. We have those experiences all the time. Like, that is a very powerful one, but they're ones that I've lived through multiple times. So just an example of kind of what those public lands and those experiences can have for people. So when I talk about outfitters, I think one of the things I want to highlight today is who we are. Because often as we get into these conversations about there's too many people out there in public lands, the target becomes outfitters pretty quickly. As far as we're the ones that are permitted, we're licensed, we already kind of operate in the system. So if we're going to go and say, hey, maybe we need to tone use down somewhere, we're usually the ones. And I want to give you a perspective of who we are and what we offer. So when you come into a room of an outfitter meeting, one, it is the broadest spectrum of beliefs you will ever walk into a room and see. You've got cowboy hats, belt buckles, and guns. You've got chacos and hippies over here. And yet we're all like best friends, and we'll sit around, drink beer, and solve problems. So if you want to see a group of people that comes together, collaborates, and solve problems, outfitters are those people just inherently in who we are. So another thing I want to talk about is, has anybody in this book anybody in this room read Anything Worth Doing? Very popular book a few years back. So in that book, one of the things they highlight is Martin Litton. He fell in love with the Grand Canyon before it was protected, before it was really the Grand Canyon that we know today in a lot of ways, as far as being a national park and everything else. The Grand Canyon was potentially going to be doomed. It was going to be dammed. He started a river company and started taking people down. That helped people fall in love with that place, and it's the reason we have the Grand Canyon today. Outfitters are advocates for places. We take people to these places and help them fall in love with those places. It's a major reason we have some of the incredible spots we get to go today. It's not just our guides, or not just our outfitters who are advocates, it's not just our guests who become advocates, it's our guides as well. We take lots of young people, help them fall in love with these great places, and now I have personally had guides that go on to lead some of the great organizations in this country advocating for these places. So we're training people up to advocate. We have a good friend who says, real advocacy is always autobiographical. Outfitters are the gateway for people to have those experiences so they can advocate. As we think about conversations, I think we're seeing this from the agencies, and we've even had these conversations today about how do we allow more people to access these spots. Outfitters are doing this. A couple years ago, I had a guest. He was paralyzed from the waist down, a veteran. We put him in an inflatable kayak and took him down the Lower Salmon, part of it with his 90-pound aid lab sitting in the front. Eventually, he gave up on the dog, and we put it in a raft, and it was a lot better experience. But we have the skills and the opportunities to open doors for people who otherwise couldn't go. We have the skills, the opportunities, the tools to take people who can't afford to buy a raft, don't know how to raft, didn't grow up like a lot of people in this room, having those outdoors experiences. We are the gateway for people, okay? This summer, we're taking a group of kids. We got a kids camp that's coming on one of our trips that is a group of kids who are all on the spectrum. Again, opening the door for people who otherwise maybe wouldn't have those experiences, or more importantly, wouldn't think that they could have those experiences. So we're there serving this broad spectrum of community. There's this perception that outfitters are here, we're serving the uber rich who get to buy our trips. And don't get me wrong, that community is part of our demographic. But it's also a way bigger spectrum than that. So outfitters serve this huge community and help them get out there. Collaboration is something we've talked about today. Outfitters, we live in these places, we work in these places. These aren't places we go visit, they're places that we love and live in. We are here to help, and we are already. I think about how many places I operate where it's the river outfitters who are organizing the river cleanups. We're going to the agencies and saying, hey, we see a problem, don't worry about it, we'll solve it. And we organize it and do it. The fee offset program with the Forest Service has been a huge success. The Salmon Chalice National Forest here in Idaho cleared more trails this year than any other forest in the country. The vast majority of that done by outfitters. Those trails that they cleared serve everybody. Great success, great collaboration. Another example, I was in a meeting on around the Rogue River with Forest Service, the BLM, and a couple other user groups talking about the increase in human-bear interactions. There was people out there feeding bears. It was not a good deal. And there was an organization, a nonprofit, that said, hey, we can donate bear boxes, little bear canisters, if people, that will help people start to use these. We're not going to mandate it. The agencies weren't interested in that. But we are happy to get the money to provide these things, these tools, but we don't have any way to get them to the public. Well, we're an outfitter, we're here, we're a shuttle provider, we interact with the public in a major way. How about you give them to us? We will get them to the public. We'll send out emails, we'll inform people ahead of time, we'll send out bear-wise information, because we basically interact with almost everybody that goes through that section of river. And then the Forest Service came and said, okay, how about we'll build a canister for the end of the trail where this is an issue, where people can return those bear canisters. So it was nonprofit group, outfitter, Forest Service, all coming together to say, hey, here's a way that we can creatively solve this problem. We as outfitters, we're here for collaboration. I think the other thing we've talked about, sort of these jump-off points, these communities. 80% of outfitters, 80% of resident outfitters and guides in Idaho live in towns of under 500 people. We live in these rural places. We live in these jump-off communities. The money we make as outfitters goes to help fund them, to help bring money into those economies. The guests that we bring to our trips brings money into those economies. For sustainability and the things we're talking about, we need those communities to be vibrant. Outfitters are a huge part of that. So the final thing I want to kind of touch on is from the outfitter perspective. I get the privilege to operate on the Rogue River in Southern Oregon, the Salmon River here in Idaho. And as I'm on my trips with guests, I regularly say to them, how incredible is this that we're floating down this river, and what we're seeing today, the way we're experiencing it, is almost identical to what it was 4 decades ago. And in an ideal world, someone 4 decades from now will have that exact same experience. The Forest Service, the agencies, decades ago, saw the exact problem we're talking about today, but in these river corridors specifically. These are incredible places that are going to see a funnel of people going to them, and they're going to be overrun. They created these river permit, lottery systems. They saw, and the way they allocated them was to the non-outfitted public and to the outfitted public, and created a system that has worked for decades. It's an example of an opportunity. It's an example of a way to solve the problem. Is it easy? No. But it is an example of something that has worked. So I think the final thing as I just wind down time, I want to leave everybody with kind of a sense of this phrase that I think is about as outfitter as it gets. So it's something I say to my kids regularly, to the point that they'll repeat it back usually before I get there. And I say it to my staff as well. We do hard things. To solve these problems that we're talking about, this room, we're all gonna have to come together and do hard things. But we've done it in the past. We have permit systems. We have systems that have proven we can. And that's just what it's gonna take. Thank you.
Thank you. I love this theme that keeps coming up, this notion that you can't save what you don't love, and you can't love what you don't know. And I think that's what all of these people are doing, is exposing people to things, to experiences that make them fall in love with a place and make them, more likely to be advocates and better stewards. The other thing I wanted to, one of my best life lessons I learned from a river guide, and it was that good judgment comes from experience comes from bad judgment, and good judgment comes from experience. So, So Brad Wilson is up next, and he is the general manager for Bogus Basin Mountain Recreation Area, which is, I'm so excited that we have this in our town. It's the largest nonprofit ski area in the country, and it's just in our backyard, and it's amazing. So take it away.
Well, thanks, Kim. I just want to tell you a little story about somebody that I think public lands changed, and for the better. I know a young man. He grew up in Orange County, California, close to the beach. In high school, he was a pretty wild kid, very intelligent, but he and his friends liked to go to the beach with beer cans and paper sacks and spend way too much time doing that instead of what they should have been doing. Well, when he graduated high school, he had the wherewithal to go to a small liberal arts community or college in Incline Village, Nevada, a college that my best friend just happens to teach at. So 6 years ago, when we were looking for a marketing coordinator, I called my friend and said, hey, do you know any recent graduates that really stood out in your program? And he gave me the name of this young gentleman. And we called him, interviewed him, flew him up. And right now, he is elevated to the Director of Marketing and Innovation at Bogus Basin. And he has been unbelievable asset to us and to the community. And to see his change from where he was to what he is now has just been remarkable. And he continues to just amaze all of us. And he even gave Kim a snowboard lesson this winter. So, it's what the outdoors can do to people is just is remarkable. And he's not on the beach with beer cans and paper sacks anymore. So we are different. Bogus Basin is a 501(c)(3). We're one of a handful of nonprofit mountain recreation areas in the country, and we're the largest one in the country. Kind of crazy. We're 16 and a half miles probably from here, straight up the mountain for those of you that don't live in Boise. I believe that I have a slide somewhere there. There we go. Being so close, in 1936, Sun Valley opened, and the people in the Boise communities discovered winter sports and skiing in general. And so in 1938, they got a group of people together, and this float was from a parade where they are announcing the building of Bogus Basin Mountain Recreation Area. And you can see our partners on that float. The city of Boise, and our good partners, the U.S. Forest Service, have been partners of ours since our inception in 1938. We actually opened in 1942. We're slightly delayed by World War II. So we've now been in business. This is our 80th anniversary. To give you a little idea of who we are, we offer 2,600 acres of skiing during the day, and we have 200 acres lit at night. We have 11 chairlifts, including 4 high-speed quads. We have 100 acres of snowmaking that is really necessary due to climate change at this point. We have a tubing hill. We have a very robust Nordic center with 37 kilometers of groomed trails, snowshoeing, and environmental education programming. Believe it or not, we're also the second largest ski area in the state of Idaho, just behind Schweitzer in northern Idaho. Our typical operating season for winter starts around Thanksgiving and usually plays out until about mid-April. Our night skiing operation starts in the middle of December and goes to the end of March. And I can tell you, by operating until 10 o'clock at night with that night skiing operation, it really opens up the opportunity and really promotes our accessibility to the community, because anybody can just about find time for skiing or snowboarding in their schedule when you're open from 9 until 10 o'clock at night. it also provides us to provide a really inexpensive opportunity for people to come up and learn to ski. A night lift ticket is just $19. That's a far cry from what you hear from some destination ski areas, right? So as our 80th anniversary season comes to a close, it will be this May 6th, be our longest season in history. And as you could see from outside, we just picked up 10 inches of new snow on the snow stake. And we will be operating from Friday through Sunday for the next 2 weekends, and then we'll open for a big, what we called our 100-inch party, which was the amount of base we had at the time, 100-inch party on May 6th, to just kind of culminate what is going to be a record season. And not only was it a record season for snow, but it's also going to be a record season for participation. We're going to see over 500,000 skier visits this year. That puts us in a completely different place than we ever thought we would be. A lot of that was driven by the pandemic and the continued demand for recreation, and particularly winter recreation. Well, we also have a robust summer operation, and in 2018, we opened 7 days a week in the summertime. And we have a lot of really cool activities. We have the Glade Runner, which is Idaho's only mountain coaster. We built a brand new three-story aerial adventure course that will be opening this summer. We have things like trampoline bungee jumps, climbing towers, summer tubing, very family-oriented. And then we have a very robust mountain bike program, really anchored by the Basin Gravity Park, which is a downhill mountain bike park. And then thanks largely to Ridge to Rivers and the city of Boise and BLM and the Forest Service and the county, we attach to all of the Ridge to Rivers trails, and we have a huge cross-country network for hikers, for bikers, and equestrians. So it's remarkable how much we have up there in the summertime. And what's really nice is the majority of the people that visit us in the summertime are not paying anything. We have a huge acre lawn, we have a beautiful patio, we have free music events, we have free yoga events. You can come up, put a blanket on the lawn with your ice chest and relax, or you can go out and hike, and all of that is free. The only time that we charge anything is if you get on one of our activities or on a chairlift. If you want to defy gravity and walk or run up the hill or bike, it's all good. And like I mentioned, like most of the outdoor industry, we experienced record demand during the pandemic. You know, we saw people who hadn't skied in years come back out and ski again. And we also saw people that had never skied come up to get outside. And we all remember how cooped up we were. And skiing and outdoor recreation provided that safe environment to come outside and socialize. Because remember, I mean, there's a lot of people around when you're at a ski area, but it was a very social environment, something you could not get anywhere else except outdoor. And given the circumstances of just the huge demand and the huge increase in volume that we saw, it really forced us into rethinking how we can accommodate all these extra people. And this forced us to look at how we sell tickets and how we manage the mountain recreation area. And so I'll come back to that being open until 10 o'clock at night. What we saw was a huge increase in people early morning, and then they would leave in the late afternoon. That is a traditional ski area. Big spike in the morning, and then in the afternoon, everybody leaves. Well, because we're open for 12 and 13 hours a day, what we did is we segmented out the day into different parcels. So you could get a lift ticket for all day, and it's going to be the most expensive. Or you could get one that starts at 3 o'clock and goes till 10. It's less expensive, and then you can go all the way up from a night ticket from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., and that's the least expensive. So by pricing and offering these various ticket programs and season pass programs, we've been able to spread people out over the day and night so we don't have the huge spikes anymore. And this year, we saw more people at certain times than we have ever seen. And like I said before, we saw overall more visits than we've ever seen in our 80-year history. We parked out one time. We never had huge lift lines, and generally speaking, it was completely less crowded than we saw pre-pandemic when we hadn't done this really thoughtful process of bringing people up at different times of the day. So, as they say, never waste a good pandemic, but it really did. It forced us into creative thinking, and our team is remarkable. And I can tell you that gentleman from Orange County helped a lot in our developing of these different programs. And of course, along with the growth that we saw from the pandemic, could I see the next slide, please? We also have seen a significant increase in the population of the Treasure Valley, which is the Boise metro area. And you can see that graph continues up on the right and continues to grow. To really accommodate both the demand that we saw from the pandemic and this kind of indigenous growth in the Treasure Valley, we're looking to expand within our current permit boundary. And eventually, as you see that graph go way up, we're going to need to probably go outside of our permit area in order to accommodate the demand that we have right now. And this is considerably different than what you'll hear in other places, perhaps, where people want to build bigger, better things under the auspices of if we build it, they will come. Well, we don't have to worry about they're already here, and we need to build it to accommodate this growth. So it makes us quite a bit different than what you see elsewhere. We also, as a ski business, you can only imagine, have a lot of challenges. Climate change, we are the canary in the coal mine. But we also, due to the potential effects of climate change, we have a huge wildfire risk. We have unpredictable snow, and we have skyrocketing insurance costs, largely driven by the wildfire potential. So it's not a life without sleepless nights. It's not, there's a lot of risk out there. You get lucky sometimes, like this year, when you have record snowfall, and as they say in my business, when it snows, we're all geniuses. But there's the other side of that coin, is when it doesn't snow. But as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Forest Service has been great partners of ours since the inception. We recently worked collaboratively with them on a forest health initiative in and around the ski area, where we remove dead and dying trees and hazard trees. And we are currently working with them to modify our master plan to allow us to replace some lifts and add some snowmaking to some terrain that really needs it. So we really, in this collaboration, we really, really appreciate this long-standing partnership with the Forest Service. And after all, Bogus Basin's nonprofit mission is to provide affordable and accessible mountain recreation. And this perfectly aligns with the Forest Service's mission to provide access and recreation to public lands. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. Brad, I really liked how you gave some really specific examples of challenges that arose during the pandemic and solutions that you came up with to get around those challenges. So I'd like to ask the other members of the panel if you have any similar really specific examples of a problem that arose that maybe turned into an opportunity or forced you to preemptively come up with a new policy or a funding change or a partnership or a collaboration. And while you're thinking, I'll share one that I observed in the Ridge to Rivers trail system. So the Mountain Bike League, which has 300 or 400 or 500 kids in the Treasure Valley, suddenly all of these kids plus a bunch more users were on the trails. And the teams had, several groups of kids, and there were getting some complaints about too many kids on the trails, right? The theme is get more kids on bikes. Now it's like too many kids on bikes. No. So what they did was they came up with a kind of a collaborative Google spreadsheet where they had signups for different teams and a limit, a cap for each day and each trailhead, and it forced all of the teams in the Treasure Valley to spread out their practice times and locations throughout the different trailheads. And it was just kind of a really simple solution to what was kind of a big problem. So any other simple solutions or policy or collaboration, partnership?
Yeah, hey, this is Evan. So, obviously COVID was such a wild time, and in the motorized industry, we saw similar growth to what everybody else saw, about 400% increase in motorized recreation across the Intermountain West. So that was a challenge, right? All the trailheads were busy, all the stage out places. So, if you're into kind of the full-size off-road community, you need a place to stage, typically lower the air pressure in your tires, right? And those were just overwhelmed with campers, dispersed recreation, and other types of recreation, which is great. For us, I think it gave us a fantastic opportunity to educate new riders, right? There were so many new riders that just wanted to get out. They wanted a capable vehicle. It's easy to get into, a side-by-side or, a used Jeep. And there was a lot of new people going out. So with that, we collaborated with Can-Am, who was a new partner actually for Tread Lightly, believe it or not. And, we have kind of transitioned all of our, formal education components into an online education platform that we'll be launching later this summer. So yeah, that was just a cool thing that happened during a wild time in COVID.
Let's see. Well, this one got mentioned earlier today, so I thought I would explain it a little bit. The Sand Flats Recreation Area, I mean, a part of what we have been talking about, and we're all kind of dancing around here in different ways, is the relationship between local government and land managers, and by the way, the tourism people, who I don't even think they're here, but that's the marketing department, and they're out there inviting everybody, and we in the product development department kind of need to catch up, right? And so this didn't happen during COVID, it was in place before, thank goodness. But the Sand Flats Recreation Area is a partnership between Grand County, Utah, and the BLM. And the way the famous Slick Rock Trail is, there's a kind of a bottleneck to get up there, so there's a good place to put a booth. And that booth you pay whether you're just going to recreate for the day or to go camping, and that is a full-on profit center. It pays for all of its staff, and it even generates matching money for projects. Like, it totally works. Now, not all places are so convenient to put a booth, but it is, when you're providing a service, it is definitely, people are prepared to pay. So that's one thing. In general, I really think that we should fund the public lands for everyone all the time, and that we as a society can afford it. And we just need to start working to build the political will to do that. And one way to build that political will is to close this gap between land managers and local electeds. Right? And so one of the other ways that we did that in Moab is we created this committee called Trail Mix. A friend of mine got elected as county commissioner, and she created this committee, and she made it super casual. But it was like, anyone can come to the Trail Mix committee meeting, and we're going to talk about, but because it was the county, all of the agencies showed up. So we had Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, state parks coming to all these meetings. So when we started talking about trail projects, it was a monthly meeting. And you had to report out in every meeting. So you couldn't just kick the can down the road. You had a meeting coming up. You had to tell everybody what you had done on the project that you were supposed to be working on. And that really dispelled a lot of distrust between the land managers and the local electeds, and also made the projects happen faster.
Quick question, did you do any work with Lander, Wyoming, that community?
We suggested that to them and sent them the charter, but how's that going?
I can't speak to that part. I just know that I was passing through Lander, and I talked to someone who told me that they originally had some kind of they had the climbing community, right? And then
Right.
when the mountain bikers showed up, there was a little bit of conflict, but then they realized, hey, all boats rise. Like if, the mountain bike community took what the climbing community had going on, I think they had like an international climbing festival, and all of the businesses realized that when that happened, money came to town, and that they used that as a model for a mountain biking festival. And then the local business owners got on board because they realized, again, it's a new crowd, new money comes to town, and I just thought it was kind of a...
And it just goes one more level. There's a lot of people who are not in the outdoor industry at all. They're computer programmers. They do all kinds of different jobs, and they want to live in a place with outdoor access. So it's no longer about, it was great when we figured out the 800 billion and we're so big, and that's all very important, Luis, wherever he went. I think he flew to DC actually, so I can talk about him. No, but that was really good and really important. But what we're seeing now is even bigger than that. This is the fundamental identity of these communities, many of whom are circling the drain. Like if you have a date for certain that your coal-fired power plant is closing, or that the coal mine is closing, you're quite motivated to pivot. And so it's really exciting what's happening, and how that really, I credit some of the success of Farmington to the mayor's relationship with the BLM, and that it was a good relationship. That's super important. So.
Does anyone have another example of a solution, a COVID problem and solution? Okay. Yes?
Well, I would just say on the COVID one, those are times we try and forget, not talk about. But the early days of COVID, it was, are we going to exist as an industry? Whole forests, whole states were being shut down to going outside. And all the permittees, us that operated there, were being shut down. And the local folks that we talked to, our BLM people, our Forest Service people, it was really a credit to them. There was collaboration there in that they were open to having those conversations with us and figuring out how we could, in the knowledge that we had, operate, and how we could do it in trying to promote safety in our communities and safety in our industries and safety to our guests and everything else. And so I would say the collaboration was there in that there was lots of relationships with our agency folks that allowed us to have really hard conversations about how to even operate.
One more thought, kind of teeing up off of that, and I guess it's kind of an example of how we looked at a bad situation and looked for opportunities within it, right? Lots of increased interest within, outside of our community, people who wanted to get more into hunting or fishing. And didn't know how to go about doing it. Maybe they were planting a garden for the first time, and they liked the idea of sourcing more sustainable sources of protein from the landscape. But I think even more so than fishing, hunting can be a very opaque activity to engage in if you have no experience, and very difficult to pick up the basics. So BHA, and we weren't alone within our space, started offering more opportunities, building up programs for, I hate the expression, adult onset hunter. It sounds like it's a disease. But for folks who wanted to participate in the traditions and the activities, and didn't know how to do it. So we have a program at BHA called Hunting for Sustainability that teaches the basics of safe firearm handling, tracking, how to go about hunting, but also offers up some basic knowledge in conservation and how to be a more informed advocate for our opportunities on our lands and waters. So it made us give some hard thought to who we are as a community, how welcoming we're being as a community, and how we can do what we can do to increase the size of the advocates out there who are speaking up on behalf of public lands and waters.
I was also wondering, the goal, or one of the goals of this symposium, this conference, is to come away with a white paper with some concrete policy ideas. Are there ways in which that, the agencies that you have to interface with on a regular basis can help you. You know, what are some of your biggest challenges, and how can those agencies help you overcome those challenges, whether it's funding or policies, rules, regulations?
I'll go first. So, hey, this is Evan. I mean, we interface with all the state and federal land management agencies across the country, some more than others, right? I think the biggest way that the agencies can help us, and at least this is for Tread Lightly, we have substantial resources, funding, manpower already built within our programs. What we need is the ability to cut through the red tape and find the right person in those district or field offices that want to get things done, you know, that want to see change, that are willing to, you know, take a stab at it from the agency side, and then give us as the, you know, enthusiast side the opportunities to give back. And really all we're looking for is who's the right person to talk to. And I think that that's a structure that needs to be built within our land management agencies a little bit better. You know, who do we interface with? I mean, I work with a different person depending on which field office I'm at or which agency office I'm at. They have a different title. Like, it's just a patchwork and very messy for us to really just get resources on the ground, mixed use resources on the ground. So I think that's a place where we should look at, and I hope the agency's looking hard at kind of their structure in coordinating with you know, nonprofits and just stewards and conservationists across the country.
I'm going to go the other way. We need to help the agencies first. Because every community that we work with, that once they get their act together and figure out what they want to do, and they put a bow on it and give it to their local land manager, and the land manager says, yeah, we'll get to that in about 5 years. And that's not okay. It's not hurting just wildlife and conservation. It's hurting everything, including the economic prospects of that community. And when you start tying land management agency funding to economic development, it's a whole different conversation. And there's been a few hints about that, but this is something that, I mean, we as a society in America have the funding to fund our public lands in perpetuity. Like, we have the money. So the thing that we're missing is the political will to make that happen. And we've been operating in this meager environment for so long that we forgot that we need to go back and make the case now. And I think now is the most important time, because I see bipartisan county commissioners and city and mayors and congressmen even from all these different communities that are seeing the benefits of public land. So now is the time for us to say, okay, good, just fund it so that you can serve the communities. Let's get past the whole sagebrush, like, thank you, Congressman Bishop, for working so hard to defund the agencies to prove that the states were going to do a better job. Well, the states can't run a deficit, and they're not doing it. So now the reason to fund the agencies is so they can serve the communities. So the whole argument needs to flip, and we need to really work starting now to get the agencies funding so then they can provide the services that are needed for all of us.
Well, in the West, almost all ski areas are on U.S. Forest Service system land, and we pay a price for that, of course, gladly. However, those funds go back into the general fund. They go back to Washington, D.C. The National Ski Areas Association has been sponsoring what they call the SHRED Act, and don't ask me what that acronym stands for, but basically what it does is it promotes those monies that are given to the individual forest to stay within that forest. Using Bogus Basin as an example, when we do and look to do expansion or any kind of work on the forest, we need to go through the NEPA process. We pay the Forest Service to do their work, whether it's biologists or botanists. We also pay third parties to come in and evaluate it. And so we're almost double dipping. We're paying the Forest Service then, and then we're paying them to take the money to Washington, D.C. What we'd love to see, and you could imagine the amount of money that Summit County, Colorado would generate through this, for it to stay locally and be spent locally. And so the SHRED Act has been in front of Congress several times. It's come close, but it needs to be voted through so we can use those funds that are generated locally to stay locally, and it would help that funding for recreation within the forest in those areas that generate the most recreation.
Yeah. Before I say anything about this, I just want to say people at these agencies are hardworking, wonderful folks. There was one permit administrator, especially that I used to work with, Joe O'Neill, who I would call every July and just say, hey, Joe, I think you're great. Because for the last 2 months, he'd been doing nothing but getting yelled at by angry people. And, you know, sometimes it's just nice to hear that somebody still likes you, even if I'd probably yelled at him the day before. I think that as far as the agencies and how they can help us, one, we pay the fees the same as you do, and we're happy to do it because the places we operate are wonderful because of the agencies that protect them and create those systems. However, we can only pay so much and remain viable and continue to do the service that we do to the public without becoming even more inaccessible for large swaths of the public. And so there's a conversation right now about changing the way cost recovery is managed in the Forest Service. That outcome, how that plays out, could put outfitters out of business and could very much stop new forms of recreation from being permitted because that cost recovery process at the beginning will become more prohibitive. And so keeping the way that, trying to increase revenue on the backs of just the outfitted public is problematic because they are the public. And so that's one way, is just kind of keep that in mind as we go forward, understanding that everybody needs more money. The reduction of red tape, like obviously. There are great people at these agencies at the ground level that the system, the way it is now, incentivizes them to say no. Because the process is too long, too hard, may piss off too many people. And so they're incentivized to say no, and they need to be incentivized maybe to say yes a little bit more. So that would be probably the two big ones that I would say.
I don't have much to add to all these great comments, but Kim, I'll go back to how you started off asking for introductions from us speakers just now, and that was to tell stories, right? I look at what is happening on our public lands and waters and the advocacy work that is underway in all of our sectors to try to advance more awareness and get more money for public land managers. And I mean, I'm a communications person, so I'm always looking for the stories and how to tell the stories and how to use our community stories to help spur action and awareness and a greater appreciation of this incredible asset that we have as Americans in the form of our public lands and waters. So I guess I would ask our public land managers, how can we help you guys better tell the stories that are playing out every day on our lands and waters?
That's great. So I want to end with a story and then give you a 1-minute wrap up. So does anyone know the story of the Teton Freedom Riders on the Teton Pass between Idaho and Wyoming? No one? Okay, I love the story. I reported this for Bike some years ago. So once upon a time, some years ago, there were illegal trail builders that were building downhill trails on Teton Pass, and they were really erosive. They were bad for the mountain, and they were also illegal. And sometimes the authorities, I think the Forest Service would shut them down, and then they'd go find another place and build another illegal trail. And one day, some hikers wandered up this illegal trail, and one of them got hurt, and the first responders couldn't find them because the trail wasn't on the map. And so it was brought to the attention of a very forward-thinking Forest Service employee named Linda Merigliano. And she realized, if I shut these guys down, they're just going to move and find a new place and build a new illegal trail. So these were all like total rogues, like bros, and they were not inclined to, I think, trust authorities. But she approached them and said, hey, let's talk for a minute. You know, what if I have this piece of land that's, it's the, you know, it's already beset by power lines. What if I gave you this piece of land and some grant money and some heavy equipment, and you can build downhill trails? All I ask is that you get some training and you build them in a way that's sustainable, that's not erosive, not a fall line trail, not bad for the mountain. And they just sort of decided to trust each other, which was kind of unheard of. And so then they started building these amazing trails on Teton Pass, and all illegal trail building virtually stopped in the area. And then when someone else started building an illegal trail, there was peer pressure, hey, stop that, because you're gonna mess it up for all of us. And I don't think it cost her very much money. I think she got a grant to give them and a bulldozer, and now one of those rogue trail builders is like building professional trails at Targhee. So I think that it always does come down to money, but sometimes creative thinking can go a long way, and building those bridges and collaborating between groups that might not have originally worked together. I mean, it can be done, and when it is done and when it does work, it's a great model to look at for other groups. So I will then throw it back to my panelists for your 1-minute wrap up.
Hey, thank you all so much for having Tread Lightly here and for you all being part of this conversation. I mean, you're the folks who are going to change things out there, and we just really appreciate you, being part of mixed-use recreation and being advocates for your type of recreation. I also want to thank these panelists. You guys are all so knowledgeable, and it's been fantastic to spend the day with you. And Kim, you're so charismatic and just been great to spend the day with you all. So yeah, thank you so much.
Untraditional partnerships, right? Like that's a theme that I think we've been touching on throughout the day. Before I came to work at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, I spent several years with an organization, hope you guys have heard of, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. The concept, the seed behind that organization was bringing together diverse partners who all share common goals when it comes to natural resources, outdoor recreational opportunities. The founder of TRCP was a gentleman named Jim Range, who was a mentor to so many of us in this space. And one of the, well, he had a few quotable quotes, but he used to paraphrase, I think Ronald Reagan said it, it's amazing what you can get done in this town being Washington, D.C., not Boise, Idaho, when you don't care who gets the credit. So here's to diverse partners, untraditional partners, working together for a greater common good.
Okay, so I come at this from a business perspective, and public lands and outdoor experiences are totally bipartisan. The economic forces are changing, and so the constructs that made it so that conservationists were hippies and resource extraction was for rednecks, like those are changing. And so right now is the time when we should really look at more funding for the agencies, because I bet you if we work even a little bit, we can find in every single congressional district a project that needs funding that is being asked for by their constituents. So I think we need to move soon. So I'm super excited that we had this conference to start this movement, so get ready, everyone.
I would just say two things. As we talk about kind of the broad spectrum of people who can get on board with these causes. A couple years ago, I was in downtown Riggins, Idaho, population 350, old resource extraction town, as sort of, in some ways, very far out on the right as far as a political place. And yet, there is a very liberal environmental organization there in the middle of a rally in downtown Riggins for a cause that the whole town is behind, because they needed support for the furthering of recreation, for the support of salmon, so that salmon fishing, which is recreation, could remain a viable tool for that town's survival. There's a huge political spectrum that can come into this conversation and move the ball forward. So the other thing I would say is, there was a moment today where someone said, hey, you're out in these great wilderness places, and the story of that place really helps that experience be more meaningful. So go with a guide. Then we don't need a QR code in the wilderness. Go with a guide who can tell you that story. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you two for allowing us to speak. It's been a pleasure sharing this with such a fine panel and amazing group of speakers. I've never spoken after a governor or now two governors, and yeah, it's a little daunting to say the least. But you know, I came here because I really truly believe in a partnership, and in our case, partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. The slide didn't lie. They've been around with us for 80 years. And we appreciate it. We know that they have challenges locally for sure, and if we can work collaboratively through some of these projects that we're talking about and these programs, I know that our Forest Service representatives want to get things done. I know that they would like to operate at the speed of business, not the speed of government. And so I think working with them and helping them facilitate some of the things that they need. As a ski area, we take up a fairly good-sized chunk of land. However, we concentrate recreation in a small area compared to if you threw 500,000 skier visits over the Boise front, you can only imagine what a mess it would be. So we, as a organization, bring those people up, invite them up, corral them, if you will, but take care of them in a relatively small footprint. And I think that's really the duty of what we have to offer, is to provide those recreational opportunities in a controlled environment. So we do appreciate the partnership, and we really look forward to another 80 years.
Thank you so much.
We have our last scheduled break before our final panel. I hear there are desserts out in the hallway, so go get some sugar and then come back and let's talk foundations.